Welcome back to the Doctor Who Marathon. I'm your host McEdam, and today we're going to be talking about the Torchwood episode, Small Worlds, written by Peter J. Hammond, who, fun fact, was originally had written a story for the Sixth Doctor during the 1980s, I believe it was called like Paradise 5. It was supposed to air during the Trial of the Time Lord saga, which was never produced on TV, but Big Finish later adapted it in audio format for their Lost story range. That's really cool. And is directed by Alice Troughton, who has no relation to Doctor Who star Patrick Troughton. So David Troughton is also a Doctor Who star, as the son of Patrick Troughton, but she has no relation to them. It's just a coincidence that her last name is Troughton. Now this story, just right off the bat, I'm just going to say, this story was heavily criticised when it aired, feeling that the whole concept of it was silly and stupid and ridiculous. The concept is Torchwood basically dealing with the supernatural, specifically fairies. Now, fairies do actually have a dark past. In most actual fairy tales, they are actually depicted as evil, malevolent creatures with this sinister attitude towards them. That they kidnapped children, they murder people and stuff. It's only with the advent of the softening of the fairy tales, which happened a lot during a lot of fairy tales. If you read like original fairy tales, most of them are extremely dark. The idea of fairies becoming these sweet, innocent creatures that are always good, never evil, kind of arisen. So this story tries to tackle with the much more original concept of fairies, but still, it's Torchwood tackling fairies. That in and of itself is a silly concept, and a lot of people just couldn't take it serious on that note. I personally think the idea, I wouldn't say could work, but I like that they attempted this, because, like I said, fairy tales are originally disgusting, horrible creatures, and Doctor Who in the past has tackled ideas of things which we thought were innocent, lovely creatures, but in actuality are horrible monsters that want to take advantage of us. So we have that on for it. This is also the first story, the only story of Series 1 in which there are no swear words. Yeah, bet you didn't know that. There's also like concepts there's also some really dark subject matter, like a child rapist is in this story. Wow, I made that sound like they actually casted a child rapist. No, in the story there's a child rapist in it. So it's dealing with a lot of that, and this story was heavily panned when it came out, and it seems to be forgotten by the fan base at large. Now, this was actually, surprisingly, one of the first stories that I watched when I was getting into Torchwood. This was one of the first stories I watched after viewing Miracle Day, which was my first Torchwood story, which, let's be honest, wasn't a great place to start. So, yeah, this story kind of, in a way, put my view of what Torchwood was back in the day, because this was, I think this was the first episode I saw from Series 1. Yeah. The story has also little mentions of the history of fairies. Are they real or not? With the mention of Harry Houdini, who once believed the fairies were real after seeing these photographs. They actually show the real life photographs, which historically they were by the creators, the two women who created it, stated that they were fake, but they went to their graves believing that fairies were real. Also, as well, in terms of that fact with Harry Houdini, that is wrong. Harry Houdini always tried to disprove fairies. It was his argument with Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, the author of Sherlock, and he was the one who, oddly enough, was fascinated with the idea that fairies were real. Yeah, that sounds more unrealistic than what Torchwood tries to present with Harry Houdini believing that the fairies are real. I mean, the magician doesn't believe in fairies, but the guy who created a fictional character based purely on logic and seduction, on inductions, believes fairies exist. Sorry, I know I'm going a little bit of tangent on real world history, but that is just such a really odd little bit of detail. So this is actually Peter J. Hammond's first script that was actually shown to us. I don't know whether the audio drama came out before this. I presume it came out later. I can't remember when the Lost Story range was released, but anyway. So there you go, that's his first story. So let's get into the narrative of it. As we see, the pre-credit sequence is this old woman, and she is around in this forest with a stone circle, and she captures fairies. Only for when she is to leave, do the fairies turn into these green, hideous creatures. And that's our pre-credit sequence. And right off the bat, we have this almost CBeebies fairy tale atmosphere about it. Now, I feel like that was an intentional part of the creative decisions, because the idea of a children's show with this horrible, disgusting, like murder and death and all that sounds really disturbing, and feels like something which fits this idea that fairy tales were, that fairies are secretly these sinister creatures who take advantage of children, and kidnap them and turn them into themselves. But right off the bat, I feel like, or at least the way that they've portrayed it, the way they've done it, leaned a bit too far into this aspect. As through the majority of story, in terms of its directing style and its thing, it feels very amateur. There are scenes of direction where the visuals just don't look as strong as they should be. Some bits feel really corny and really silly. When Jack, there's a bit where Jack and Gwen are talking about fairies and their existence, and Jack's talking about how like they live around us, and the camera kind of spins around them, which is supposed to like symbolize, you know, the fairies could be like all around us, like the camera's all around our characters. But the camera, I don't know, the way the camera moves, it's a bit too silly, it's a bit too quick. It feels really corny rather than a creepy, suspenseful moment. And I felt like that was a kind of a poor decision at that moment in time. But I'm getting ahead of myself. We see Jack trying to get some sleep, in which he has nightmares of an incident where he's on a old-fashioned train and he looks around and sees dead bodies with flower leaves coming out of their mouths. We do later on learn what this is all about, but it's one of those things where it's like it's coincidence. Actually, I don't know, because in this story it kind of makes sense, because they explain that fairies are not aliens. They are part of the human world, but they've existed since the dawn of time, and they are these really malevolent creatures that control basically everything and anything that they want. So maybe they put the idea that Jack in his head, like he can sense it, he can feel it. Who knows? But Jack gets an invitation and takes Gwen with him to meet this an old friend of him, this old woman who describes that she knew Jack's father. What? And Gwen is like, hold on, she knew your father? I need to know a little bit more of this. So this woman shows Jack the photos that we've seen. Originally, Gwen is like, you can't be serious. Fairies? Which kind of puts her in the audience's perspective. You know, she is the character who the audience relates to, and we as an audience viewer is like, really, Torchwood? You're gonna tackle fairies? Which is kind of an aspect I like. It's like Gwen is like, really, fairies? That's really stupid. And slowly throughout the story, we kind of understand the seriousness of the situation. Jack describes that he's seen only evil fairies, but this old woman, she only sees good fairies. So there's that. And this woman, she seems like a really lovely character and a very lovely person. But I feel like the story that she's introduced here really doesn't fit. Remember, this is Torchwood. In the last episode of Torchwood, we just had the girlfriend of one of our main characters be turned into a half Cyberman and slaughter people, and it was brutally murdered and put her brain inside of another person with there's blood and scars over her face. And here we have this really light moment where this woman, almost like a character from like the Sarah Jane Adventures, has this really light-hearted tone about her, and there's this really nice somber moment with her and Jack, and you can kind of get the impression that Jack really cares for this woman. Gwen sees a photo of presumably Jack's father, who looks identical to him. She asks Jack about it, believing that it was him, but Jack is like, no, that's my father. It's like, you look exactly the same. I think it's clear from the acting and the performance that Gwen isn't buying it. She knows that Jack is an immortal at this point, that he can't die by normal means. So I think she easily puts together that Jack is the person in the photo, and clearly that she has some sort of appreciation for Jack. All the while, we see this little girl, and she's going back from school, where this man, this stalker, tries to pick her up in his car, only for the weather around that area to go absolutely haywire, and he seems to be getting tortured from the inside as he starts being sick. But when he's throwing up, flower leaves come out of his throat, which kind of makes a connection between Jack's nightmare. And he tries to arrest himself. He forces himself on the police to arrest him to keep him safe. We get this really disturbing scene where he tells the police that he's done wrong. I'm sorry, it's the children, it's their little smiles and their little bodies, and then they arrest him. Now, this is one criticism with the story that a lot of people have, and I do too, and it's a massive issue with this story. One word: tone. This story is all over the place. We have scenes where it's really taking itself like really seriously, and it's really dark and gritty, and we've got ideas of this rapist being tortured by these fairies that follow these children, and then we get really silly, light-hearted scenes. Not that they can't work together, but the way they're melded in this story doesn't feel right. They feel interconnected. They feel like they should be different aspects of a different show, and we get moments where we're getting into the story and you're like, right, this might be a way to get introduced to Torchwood. It's much more lighter than your average Torchwood stories, and you've got no swearing, saying, you can get there. And then all of a sudden we have this guy confess he's a rapist, and he gets murdered in a really horrific way with these pedals and him being sick like that. We later Torchwood discover him being tortured, and he dies in his cell, and Torchwood goes in to investigate him, where they find the pedals in his mouth, and it's like, right, the fairies, they're coming out. And Jack describes that these fairies are these malevolent creatures, and they're here to find a chosen one, a child that they kidnap and turn them into one of themselves. For you see, these fairies are actually children from all dawns of time and space that get converted into their species, into their cause. So the fairies, they actually kidnap human children and turn them into themselves. For you see, these fairies aren't actually fairies, they're actually human children taken from space and time and get converted into these fairy creatures. That's what they are, and that's what the chosen ones are. They are children destined to become these horrible fairy creatures. So throughout the story, we have this back of the ranch storytelling. We have Jack and Gwen and all that discovering all about these fairies, what's happening to them. Later on, that woman that Jack was very friendly with, she actually gets killed by fairies after discovering, there are evil ones. And this takes Jack, hits Jack very emotionally, in which he reveals to Gwen that it was him that met her during World War II. And it's also here, that he talks about the train sequence, about his nightmare in which once during, I think it was 1902, he was in command of a squadron, and he found out later that a few of them got drunk and ran their car, killing a child. That child just so happens to be a chosen one, so it killed all of the men, apart from Jack, because Jack is immortal and he cannot be affected by the fairies, or at least I don't think so. They never actually mention why Jack was spared at that moment. Surely he would be suffering at the very least, so that's a bit odd in that regard. Dunno, who knows? So we have that little plot, and so that's some really nice revelations, some character development, or at least a character revelation for Jack and Gwen. Although it's not actually stated here, the ideas of Jack living for a very, very long time are actually implanted here. Obviously, as somebody who watched his episodes in Doctor Who, we know that he was at least once a time traveller, and he was stuck in the year 1000. So it's not here really yet, because we can easily indicate that these adventures, the one in World War II and the one in 1902, that they were events through Jack's time traveling shenanigans. Maybe even before his adventures with the Doctor. You never know. But this is actually the first implication, which would later get explained in later episodes, that Jack's immortality extends to him not aging and can live seemingly forever. He doesn't seem to age. He seems to be trapped in his body of now. Looks like it. That depends. We don't know that as of this moment. But anyway, back at the ranch storytelling, we have this plot line, but we also have the plot line with the child. And to say that this storyline, one of the big issues with Torchwood is that a majority of their stories could have easily been told in a family-friendly environment, and you wouldn't really lose anything. Throughout most of this story, that is the case. We get this storyline with this child. She gets followed, but then these fairies save her. She seems to be a very odd child. She seems to not have any friends. She doesn't seem to laugh when anyone's around. All she wants to do is play in the forestry outside her garden, all by herself, seemingly. As we know, she is one of the chosen ones who who is destined to become a fairy, so she is protected by her fairy kind. There's a scene in which she gets bullied in school in a really poorly directed scene, because we get a scene of like her in the school. We see the teacher looking around, and then we see other kids, her bullies, basically pick her up onto her, throw her to the floor and start kicking her. The teacher, despite this throughout the rest of the story, indicated that she's this lovely teacher who looks out for all the children, including this estranged girl, does absolutely nothing. Clearly indication is supposed to be, she didn't see these events, but the way the directing is, the way the shot, the way the camera angles work it, feels like that she should be looking right at them and doesn't do anything to bar witness this. It's very strange and very bizarre. There's also some really strange logic gaps in this. Jack states it's like we cannot track these creatures down. These fairies don't come out in any of these radars, but he tells Toshika that they can actually control the weather, the elements, fire, water, wind, and they create weather forecasts when things don't go their way. So look out for any weather forecasts, any signs of like any unusual weather. Now that gets stated to Toshika, and she is very aware that fairies control over the weather. So please someone tell me, why does every time they track down an unusual weather, it's like always like in a very oddly specific place, like at the old woman's house when she dies, and at this moment in the school, does she act like, but this doesn't make any sense. There just so happens to be a weather forecast, a weather differential with wind or rain at this very tiny location, and it's up to then Jack or anybody else listening into her ramblings to indicate this is the fairies' work. So Toshika's an absolute idiot in this story. The story is mainly focused on Gwen and Jack. This is a Gwen and Jack centered story. The rest of the Torchwood team are easily background characters here, which I've stated before. Because this is a series with 5 main casts, I think it's okay to save some of those character moments in certain episodes for them to be to shine in other episodes. So the other Torchwood team are kind of background, but the stuff with Toshika just really not got on my skin, but was kind of irritated because we as an audience viewer saw that she was told that this is what the fairies do, and every time the fairies do this, she acts like what's going on? I don't understand. Okay, she doesn't act like that. I don't know what that was all about. We also see that she has a struggling relationship between her and her stepfather. Slowly, because of the way she acts, the way she is hard to communicate, does the stepfather become a lot more aggressive. One point stating it's like, no wonder your father left you, no wonder you don't have any friends. Before at one point, to try and finish this nonsense, because he doesn't know anything that's going on, actually barricades the fence blocking the garden from the forestry behind the house, so she can't get in, and she bites him on the hand, to which the father promptly slaps her. So clearly there's this distant relationship there. Now, this aspect, again, it's all about tone in this adventure. This story seems to be one that is heavily reliant on its creepy atmosphere, its creepy tone of how this horrible thing can affect children as well. Like, we have paedophiles and we have these fairies are planning on kidnapping a child, but the majority of the story just doesn't add up to it, and feels like the story's taking this situation, these environments, these ideas way too lightly, which makes this story feel kind of inappropriate. Like the narrative itself is inappropriate. Like, you shouldn't be dealing with this aspect in this way whilst also having a paedophile, a child paedophile in the episode. It's just odd, it's bizarre, it doesn't make any sense. It's very, very, very strange, very bizarre, very odd, yes. Yeah, but I think that's the problem with this story, I think narratively, not that it all works, but it all fits pretty much, but it's all about the tone, and the ideas of this story really don't add up, and the way it's structured, the way it's paced. It's also important to note that this story is incredibly slow. Nothing really much happens until literally the 10-20 minute before the credits, near the end of the story. And so the narrative feels like it's dragging at a snail's pace, and I think that doesn't help this story in any way, shape or form. But the story does lead into a pretty dark ending, which actually does summarize its ideas, as the little girl, after summoning the army of fairies, which we will get into, breaks a hole in the fence, and she goes into the forestry, and Jack basically tries to bargain with the fairies to try and save the child. But the child, being a part of the chosen ones, wants to go to the fairies. She doesn't care about her mother or her stepfather or anyone in this real world. She just wants to become part of this fairy world, this astral projection form. Now, another thing this story gets heavily criticised for, the CGI work on the fairies and the fairies' design in hand. They look absolutely horrible. There's no way past it. You can clearly see the show's budget on its sleeve, and there's some really poor directing from it. There's scenes where the fairies are supposedly interacting with the people, but the eye lines are wrong, the movement is wrong, everything just feels wrong. And it makes you much more aware that you're watching a television program. And so, yeah, the fairy aspects just really don't work. But we get this really horrible moment in terms of the thing, but not in terms of the narrative. For the start, it's a really strong scene in which Jack, he knows that there are no way of fighting these creatures. There is no way. And these creatures threaten, if they don't get the child, if they don't have the chosen one, they will basically create mass death and destruction throughout the earth. And so Jack has no choice but to let them have the child. Whilst the child's mother witnesses this just after the death of her partner, she now has to witness her child disappearing, vanishing forever, never to be seen again in the real world. And it all breaks down, and it's all full of tears, really high emotional segment there. And then the story just kind of cuts to the next scene, in which all the team leaders are going into the car, and ignoring Jack, because it's he's basically sacrificed a child to save the world, and Jack is like, what was I supposed to do? This is kind of foreshadowing something that happens to him later on, and kind of connects thematically with Torchwood as a whole, not just season 1, but Torchwood as a whole. There's this theme, this idea here regarding children and the sacrifices that children make, as well as the adults who put them in this situation. So I guess it kind of builds up to it. But the fact is, we get this tortured moment of this mother, and then we just sort of completely forget about her. In fact, the story ends with Gwen into Torchwood Base looking at that old photo again after the screen just sort of disappears, and she zooms in on the photo and reveals that one of the fairies' faces is actually the child, proclaiming that the photos are actually real, and that the fairies and this girl, because the fairy can go anywhere in time and space, she went back and is having fun living as a fairy. leaving the story on a happy note. What? Like, we can completely forget that Torchwood Jack left this woman without a husband and a child. It's very strange, very bizarre. But anyway, that's Small Worlds, and you could probably guess from this vlog, it's not a particularly great one. This is a story which has a lot of issues throughout the board, from its pacing, from its tone, from its characterizations, from its strange moments. It seems like it doesn't know if it wants to be this dark fairy tale or a full-on gritty realization of these events. And so the story just kind of trimples. And I think you could justify that if it wasn't for the fact that the story, the narrative, is so extraordinarily boring. The story is absolutely boring. And it's probably one of the first Torchwood episodes so far, which I generally say I do not like. I mean, with Day One and Cyberwomen, they had their moments, despite people, not liking them, and I understand that. I myself also didn't like those stories growing up, but there are lots of things to like about those stories, like about those narratives. There's a lot of great character beats and character moments. But here, I don't feel like we get a lot of that to justify the narrative. Sure, we get some nice moments of Jack after the death of somebody he cared about during World War II, and the death and that toll that's taken on him, and then later on, the sacrifice he had to make of giving up a child just to save the world. But it's too little, too late, if that makes any sense. And that's why Small Worlds is a full-on dud. Although I will state, if you like this story, if you like this adventure, that is perfectly fine and you're entitled to your own opinion. It just didn't fit with me. So there you go, that's Small Worlds. So join me next time when the Doctor has taken Martha back to her home time in her own place, but they get caught up in a mysterious science experiment to do with Professor Lazarus. So join me next time for the Lazarus experiment. And I'll see you next time on the Doctor Who Marathon. Ta-da!